The Convoy was not a warship. Everyone in the galaxy knew that. Convoy Erebus 7 carried grain, medicine, and water purifiers. It flew under the blue and white flag of the Sol Trade Authority. It had no weapons worth mentioning. 3 escort ships, lightly armed, just enough to scare off pirates. That was all. It was heading to the colony world of Petra 9, a small human settlement on the edge of the Verge, the rough stretch of space where 3 alien empires met and argued over borders. Petra 9 had no military value. It had farms, it had schools. It had 11,000 people who had left Earth to build something new. Captain Mara Solis stood on the bridge of the lead ship, the Meridian, watching the stars slide past. She was 41 years old, with gray already creeping into her dark hair. She had flown this route 8 times before. Nothing ever happened on this route. That was why she liked it. 2 hours to Petra 9, said her navigator, a young man named Dev. Quiet skies. Mara nodded. She did not relax. Old habit. Her father used to say that the moment you trust the quiet bites you. The quiet bit. It started as 3 dots on the long-range scanner, then 6, then 12. Ships dropping out of warp in a wide circle around the convoy, cutting off every escape route. Mara's screen filled with red. Identify, she said. Her voice did not shake. Not yet. Dev's hands moved fast over his console. His face went pale. Connoir Dominion markings. Heavy cruisers. I'm counting 12 warships. We have 3 escorts and 4 cargo haulers. 12 against 7, and the 7 were not built to fight. The Connoir were not new enemies. They were an old empire, proud and cruel, who believed that strength was the only law that mattered. They had pushed into human space twice before, in small skirmishes along the border, testing how hard humans would push back. Both times, Earth's government had responded with strong words and weak action. Sanctions, formal complaints, nothing more. The Cathor had learned a lesson from that. They learned that humans talked big and did little. A channel opened on the bridge speaker, unrequested. A deep, rasping voice filled the air, speaking accented trade common. Human vessels. You will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resist, and you will be destroyed. This is Warlord Threx of the 9th Fleet. You have 30 seconds. Mara's hands curled into fists at her sides. This is Captain Mara Solis, of the civilian convoy Erebus 7. We are unarmed cargo. We carry no weapons of war. I am invoking the Geneva Interstellar Accords. Attacking unarmed civilian transport is a war crime under 20 seconds, Threx said, and the channel cut. Dev looked at his captain. Mara, what do we do? There was nothing to do. 3 light escorts could not stop 12 cruisers. Mara knew this the way she knew her own name, but she also knew her duty, and her duty was to buy time, any time at all, for the cargo ships to try to run. Scatter the haulers, she said. Full burn, every direction. Escorts, form up on me. We hold as long as we can. That's a death sentence, Dev whispered. It's a job, Mara said. Do it. The Cathor did not wait for 30 seconds. At second 19, their cruisers opened fire. The escort ship Halcyon took the first hit directly amidships. Its hull tore open like wet paper, venting atmosphere and crew into the cold dark in a silent, terrible bloom. There was no scream over the comms. Just static, then silence, then a name struck from the crew roster forever. Mara watched it happen on her screen and felt something in her chest go very still and very cold. Captain, Dev shouted. Hauler 3 is hit. They're venting cargo. They... Keep them moving, Mara said. Keep everyone moving. The Meridian rocked hard as a glancing shot caught its shields. Alarms screamed across the bridge. Mara held the rail and kept her eyes forward, because if the captain looked afraid, the whole crew would feel it in their bones. For 6 minutes, the convoy ran, and the Cathor hunted. 6 minutes of fire and fear, and the kind of helplessness that makes a person's hands shake, even when their voice stays steady. The second escort, the Falling Star, took 3 hits and went dark, drifting, its crew trapped inside a dying hull. Then the Meridian's own shields failed. Mara felt the ship shudder under her feet like something alive and dying. Sparks burst from a console. A crewman near the back fell, hit by debris, and 2 others dragged him toward the medical bay, while the ship rocked again and again. Hull breach, Deck 4, the ship's automated voice announced, calm in a way that felt cruel against the chaos. Hull breach, Deck 4. Hull breach, Deck 6. Dev grabbed Mara's arm. We need to surrender. Mara, please. If we surrender, they might let the crew live. They might. They won't, Mara said quietly. She had read the reports from Kadathor, border skirmishes before. Surrendered crews did not come home. They became trophies, or worse. She made her choice in that moment, the only choice left to her. Not surrender, and not blind defiance either. Something in between, something a captain owes her crew when there is no good ending left to choose. All hands, she said into the ship-wide comm, her voice carrying through every speaker on the dying meridian. This is the captain. Abandon ship. Escape pods. Now. That's an order. She turned to Dev. Get to a pod. What about you? Somebody has to keep the engines running long enough for the pods to clear the blast radius, Mara said. Go, Dev. That's an order too. Dev's eyes were wet, but he understood the math of it as well as she did. He saluted, sharp and quick, the way cadets are taught, and rarely ever truly mean, and then he ran. Mara stayed on the bridge alone, holding the failing ship together through sheer will and burning circuits, watching the small lights on her display as escape pods launched, one after another, scattering into the black like seeds thrown from a dying tree. 11 pods got away, 43 souls. The Meridian did not. The last thing Mara Solis saw, before the final hit found her bridge, was the bright burst of a transmission going out. Automatic distress beacon, the strongest one the ship carried, broadcasting on every frequency, screaming into the void with everything the convoy had left to give. It would take 11 hours for that signal to reach the nearest relay station. It would take 3 more hours after that for the relay to bounce it across the network, station to station, until it reached a quiet, unremarkable communications post just outside the Sol system. And it would take only 40 seconds, after that, for the message to land on a desk in a building in Geneva, where a tired aide would read the words, "Convoy destroyed, civilian casualties, Cathor Dominion forces," and feel her blood run cold. She would not waste a single minute getting that message to the people who needed to see it. Because for the first time in over 100 years, the words attached to that report were not the words anyone in the galaxy expected to read about humanity. They were not words of apology. They were not words asking for calm. They were not the soft language of a species that always chose to talk instead of fight. They were 3 words, stamped at the bottom of the emergency directive that went out within the hour, to every Earth military command, every colony defense fleet, every ship still flying under the blue and white flag. Full mobilization authorized. Far away, on a quiet bridge belonging to a Cathor cruiser, Warlord Threx watched the wreckage of Convoy Erebus 7 drift apart, and felt nothing but satisfaction. He had expected nothing different. Humans always reacted the same way. A formal complaint. A diplomatic protest. Soft words from soft people who had grown comfortable and weak inside their quiet little system, 200 years removed from the wars that had once nearly destroyed their homeworld. He did not know that he had just made the single greatest mistake of his life. He did not know that somewhere on Earth, in underground command centers that most civilians did not even know existed, doors that had been sealed for over a century were beginning, slowly and with a grinding sound like old stone waking up, to open. He did not know that humanity's wars were not gone, they had only been sleeping. And he had just kicked over the wrong hornet's nest, in the one corner of the galaxy where the hornets had been quietly building bigger and bigger nests, for longer than anyone outside Sol System had ever bothered to check. 12 hours later, every comm channel across human space carried the same short, cold message from Earth's unified command. To the Cathor Dominion, you attacked an unarmed civilian convoy. You killed our people. You will answer for it. This is Earth's declaration of war. The galaxy, for the first time in living memory, went very, very quiet, waiting to see what humanity would do next. 300 meters under the Nevada desert, lights that had not turned on in 11 years flickered to life one bank at a time, until an entire underground city woke up at once. General Elena Voss felt the floor hum beneath her boots, as the old reactor spun up to full power. She had been the commanding officer of Site Hadrian for 6 years, and in all that time, the place had been little more than a museum with a skeleton staff. Now it was waking up like a sleeping giant pulled out of a long, uneasy dream. Full mobilization confirmed, her aide said, reading from a tablet, his hands not quite steady. Ma'am, this is real. This isn't a drill. I know, Voss said. She walked down the central corridor of Hadrian, past rows of mothballed ships in their docking cradles, past racks of weapons that had not been fired outside a test range in over a decade. Site Hadrian was one of 9 such facilities scattered around Earth, built in the dark years after the last war, when humanity had finally stopped fighting itself and decided, with grim and quiet unity, to prepare for the day someone from beyond the stars decided to test them. That day had never come, until now. Voss reached the command floor, a wide circular room ringed with screens, and found it already filling with officers pulled from retirement, reservists called back to duty, and a thin scattering of younger soldiers who had trained for this their whole careers, and never truly believed they would see it. On the central screen, a live feed showed the president of the Unified Earth Council, a calm, gray-haired woman named Adaeze Okonkwo, addressing the planet. The Convoy Erebus 7 was unarmed, President Okonkwo was saying, her voice steady despite the weight in it. It carried grain and medicine for the families of Petra 9. 43 of our people survived. 112 did not. Captain Mara Solis stayed at her post so that others could escape. She did not survive. The room went silent at that. Voss closed her eyes for a single second, just one, and then opened them again, because there was no time for grief yet. Grief was a luxury for after. For 200 years, the president continued, Earth has chosen restraint. We chose diplomacy when our patrol ships were harassed at our borders. We chose patience when our colonies were threatened. We believed that talking, always talking, was the better path. That belief ends today. This is not a punitive strike, she said. This is not a border skirmish. As of this hour, Earth and the Cathor Dominion are at war, and we intend to fight it the way our ancestors fought wars before we left this planet. Completely. Without half measures. Without apology. God help anyone who mistakes our silence for weakness ever again. The feed cut. In the command room of Site Hadrian, nobody cheered. War was not something soldiers cheered for, not the ones who understood what it cost. But every back in that room straightened just a little, and every face hardened just a little, and General Voss felt the old machine of Earth's military, dormant for 100 years, begin to turn its gears once more. Talk to me, she said to her staff. Where do we stand? A young officer named Captain Ruiz pulled up the fleet status. 9 deep storage sites worldwide, all coming online within the hour. Combined storage capacity across all sites is, ma'am, it's over 4,000 warships. The room went quiet again, a different kind of quiet. 4,000, Voss repeated. The last war taught us never to be caught small again, Ruiz said. Every site has been maintained. Every ship is combat ready. We never had a reason to use them. Voss looked at the schematics, scrolling past on the screen. Ships built in secret over 100 years, paid for quietly, built quietly, hidden in plain sight inside mountains and under deserts and beneath the ocean floor, because the people who survived the last war had learned one brutal lesson and never forgot it. Peace only lasts as long as you are strong enough to make someone else choose it. What about crew? She asked. Ships are nothing without people to fly them. Reserve call-up is already underway, Ruiz said. Every person who served, every person who trained, every cadet program graduate for the last 30 years. We're pulling from civilian life too. Volunteer enlistment is, he paused, checking the number twice. Ma'am, volunteer enlistment crashed the recruitment servers 40 minutes ago. People are lining up outside enlistment offices in every major city on the planet. Voss allowed herself, for just a moment, something close to a smile. Earth had spent 2 centuries being underestimated. The Cathor, the other empires watching from a careful distance, all of them had decided long ago that humans were a small, soft, talkative species who built nothing worth fearing. They had never seen what humans built when they were frightened, or angry, or both at once. Get me a strike fleet assembled, Voss said. I want eyes on the Cathor border within 72 hours. I want every ally we have contacted before that. And somebody find out where Warlord Threx is right now, because that man is about to learn something about us the hard way. Across the planet, the mobilization spread like a wave. Shipyards that had built civilian freighters for decades shifted overnight to military production lines, blueprints decades old, pulled from sealed archives and put back into action. Factories that made farm equipment retooled within a single day to produce armor plating. Schools closed so buildings could be used for emergency housing and supply staging. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos. The kind that only a species which had once fought itself half to death and then rebuilt from the ashes could manage with such grim, practiced efficiency. In low orbit above Earth, the first ships began to leave dock. Sleek gray hulls, built for war and built to last, formed up in formation against the black, engines glowing blue-white as they tested systems that had not been live-fired in a generation. Aboard one of those ships, the heavy cruiser Tempest, a young pilot named Kai Anders sat in the cockpit of his fighter and looked out at the assembling fleet through his canopy glass. He was 23 years old. He had trained for combat flight for 6 years, and never once expected to use it for anything more than border patrol drills. His comm crackled. His wing commander, a grizzled veteran named Banks, who had actually served in the tail end of the last war as a young man, spoke low and even. "You scared, kid?" Kai thought about lying, decided against it. "Yes, sir." "Good," Banks said. "Means you're paying attention. Listen close. Out there, the Kathor think we're soft. They think 200 years of peace made us forget how to fight. We're about to remind them." "How do we do that, sir?" Banks's voice carried something old and tired and absolutely certain, all at once. "We do it the way we always have, kid. We get angry, we get organized, and then we get them back, twice as hard as they hit us." The fleet assembled in silence above the Earth, 4,000 ships strong and growing by the hour, while down on the surface a planet that had not gone to war in 200 years rolled up its sleeves and remembered, all at once, exactly what it was capable of. Far across the galaxy, in the courts of the other great empires, alarms of a different kind began to sound. Diplomats and spies and analysts from a dozen alien civilizations watched the human mobilization numbers come in, and felt the same cold understanding settle over them all at once. The sleeping giant was not sleeping anymore. And nobody, not even the humans themselves, was entirely sure what it would do once it was fully awake. 71 hours after the declaration of war, the Earthstrike fleet dropped out of warp at the edge of Kathor territory, and the sky itself seemed to bend under the weight of it. 1,200 ships, cruisers, carriers, destroyers, and at the center of it all, the flagship Resolute, a vessel so large that smaller craft used to dock inside its hull, like birds returning to a nest. General Voss stood on its bridge, watching the sensor display fill with the shapes of human steel. More warships in one place than most species ever built across a century. "Position confirmed," said the tactical officer. "We are inside the Verge, 18 light hours from the nearest Kathor colony world, Drakal Prime. No hostile contacts yet." "They'll have seen us coming," Voss said. "Sensors that size don't hide a fleet this large. Open a channel to Drakal Prime Command. Let them know exactly who's knocking." The channel opened. On the main screen, a Kathor officer appeared, broad-shouldered and gray-skinned, with the ridged jaw and dark eyes typical of his species. He looked at the fleet filling his sensor readouts, and, for just a moment, something flickered behind his composed expression, something that looked almost like disbelief. "This is General Elena Voss of the Unified Earth Fleet," Voss said, her voice carrying the calm, flat certainty of someone who had nothing left to prove and everything already decided. 71 hours ago, your forces destroyed an unarmed civilian convoy and murdered 112 of our people. We are here to collect a debt." The Kathor officer's composure cracked, just slightly. "You cannot be serious. You bring 1,200 ships over a cargo convoy?" "We bring 1,200 ships," Voss said, "because that is what was sitting quietly in our shipyards, doing nothing, for 100 years. Consider this a courtesy call. The next fleet we send will not announce itself first." She cut the channel before he could respond. On the bridge, Captain Ruiz leaned toward her, voice low. "Ma'am, that's going to provoke a full Dominion response. They're not going to sit back and let us sit at their border." "That's the idea," Voss said. "We are done sitting quietly, while people decide we're not worth taking seriously." She was right. Within 6 hours, Kathor Dominion sensors across the sector lit up with the news, and within 12, Warlord Threx himself, commander of the 9th Fleet, and the man responsible for the slaughter at Erebus 7, received orders directly from the Dominion's High Command to assemble a counterforce and crush the human incursion before it could grow into something the Dominion could not control. Threx received those orders with something close to relief. He had expected nothing from the humans but words. A fleet at his border was, in its own strange way, an opportunity, a chance to finish what he had started, and to remind the wider galaxy exactly why the Cathor Dominion was feared. He assembled 800 warships, nearly his entire sector fleet, and set a course for the Verge. What he did not know, what nobody outside Earth's high command yet understood, was that the 1,200 ships sitting at the border were not the whole of Earth's strength. They were the visible fist. Behind them, quietly, 3 more fleets were already moving into position along separate vectors, slipping through old smuggler routes and forgotten star lanes that Earth's intelligence services had mapped in secret for decades, preparing for exactly this kind of war and exactly this kind of enemy. Aboard his fighter in the Tempest's launch bay, Kai Anders sat strapped into his cockpit, listening to the countdown toward the Cathor fleet's projected arrival. His hands, steady through weeks of drills, now had the faintest tremor in them. He noticed it and forced himself to breathe. First contact in approximately 4 hours. Banks's voice came over the squad comm. Listen up, all wings. The Cathor fight with discipline and numbers. They expect their enemy to break formation under pressure. We do not break formation. We do not freelance. We fly tight. We fly together. And we trust the plan. What's the plan, sir? Someone asked. What the plan? Banks said, with the dry humor of a man who had seen war before and knew the value of a steady voice, is that General Voss has been planning this exact fight for longer than most of you have been alive. Our job is simple. Hold the line, protect the carriers, and let her work. 4 hours later, the Cathor fleet arrived in a blaze of warp light, 800 warships forming up in tight defensive wedges, their gray hulls bristling with weapons designed to overwhelm and crush smaller, weaker forces the way they always had. Voss watched them assemble on her display and felt no fear at all, only a cold, focused clarity that had been building in her for 71 hours straight. They're forming the standard Cathor crush formation, Ruiz reported. Wedge assault, designed to punch through our center and split the fleet. Let them try, Voss said. Order the fleet to adopt formation hollow shield. Carriers to the rear. Cruisers form the outer ring. Fighters launch on my mark. The Cathor fleet surged forward, confident in the tactic that had broken a dozen lesser fleets across 100 years of small border conflicts. They expected the humans to panic, to scatter, to fight with the disorganized desperation of a species unused to war on this scale. Instead, the human fleet held its shape like a fist closing slowly around a throat. Fighters, launch, Voss ordered. Kai's fighters shot out of the Tempest's bay alongside 300 others, forming up in tight wings, just as Banks had drilled into them for weeks. Below and around them, the human cruisers opened fire in coordinated volleys, not the chaotic scattershot the Cathor expected, but precise, layered barrages that targeted shield generators and engine cores with surgical intent. The Cathor wedge formation, built to punch through panic and disorder, found instead a wall that bent but did not break, and answered every blow with one twice as calculated. Threx watched from his flagship as his lead cruisers began taking damage far faster than his battle models had predicted. Increase fire rate, he snarled. Punch through their center, now. But the human center was not where he thought it was. It was a feint, drawn deliberately thin, to invite exactly the kind of overcommitment Threx was making, while the real weight of the human fleet curved around from the flanks like a closing hand. General, Ruiz said, watching the formation collapse around the Cathor fleet exactly as planned. They're starting to break formation, confusion spreading through their lines. Hold the shield, Voss said. Let them come to us. We do not need to chase a wounded animal. We let it exhaust itself against a wall it cannot move. For 3 brutal hours, the battle raged across the dark space at the edge of the Verge. Ships burned on both sides. Kai watched 2 pilots from his own wing vanish in bursts of light that meant their fighters, and the people inside them, simply ceased to exist. He felt the loss like a physical blow, but Banks's voice in his ear kept him steady, kept him flying the formation, kept him doing the job in front of him, instead of breaking down under the weight of what was happening around him. Slowly, inevitably, the Cathor formation began to crack. Their wedge, built for overwhelming weaker enemies quickly, was not built to survive a long, grinding fight against an enemy that refused to scatter and refused to retreat. Ship after ship fell out of formation, damaged or destroyed, until what had been 800 proud warships became a ragged, disorganized mass, trying desperately to disengage. Threx, watching his fleet crumble around him, finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. The humans had not panicked. They had not begged. They had built a fist in silence for 100 years, and waited, patiently, for a reason to use it. "All ships fall back," he ordered, his voice tight with something he had never expected to feel toward the soft, talkative species he had so casually attacked 3 days earlier. "Fear. Pursue and disable," Voss ordered calmly. "We are not here for slaughter. We are here to make a point. Let the survivors carry it home. The human fleet, let the broken remains of the Kothor Ninth Fleet retreat, battered and humiliated, back across the border they had crossed so confidently only days before. Of the 800 ships Threx had brought to the fight, fewer than 300 made it home." Aboard the Resolute, General Voss watched the retreating enemy fleet on her screen, and allowed herself, finally, a single slow breath of something like relief. "Message for Dominion High Command," she said. "Tell them exactly what happened here today. Tell them this was a sector fleet, not our full strength, and tell them that if they want to know what happens when they bring our full strength to bear, they are welcome to find out." Far across the galaxy, in the quiet halls of a dozen other alien empires watching the battle reports come in, the same realization spread like wildfire through every analyst, every diplomat, every general who had once dismissed humanity as a soft and harmless species. The humans had not just won a battle. They had announced, in the clearest language the galaxy understood, exactly what they had been hiding behind: 200 years of careful, patient silence. 3 weeks after the Battle of the Verge, the Kothor Dominion's High Council met in their capital world, a planet called Threnna, in a chamber built from black stone, meant to remind everyone inside it that the Dominion did not lose wars. It was losing this one. Grand Marshal Kovex Dahl sat at the head of the council table, a massive figure even among the Kthor, his armor scarred from 3 centuries of campaigns against lesser species across known space. He had fought and crushed a dozen civilizations that dared resist Dominion expansion. None of them had prepared him for what intelligence reports were now telling him about Earth. "Explain to me," he said, his voice a low rumble that filled the chamber, "how a species we assessed as harmless 6 months ago has destroyed 4 border fleets in 3 weeks. The intelligence officer who answered, a smaller Kothor named Vass, kept his eyes carefully lowered. Reporting bad news to the Grand Marshal was not a position anyone envied. "Our assessments were wrong, Marshal," Vass said. "We believed humanity's peaceful posture reflected weakness. It did not. It reflected patience. Our analysts have recovered fragments of human military history. 200 years ago, Earth fought a war among itself so devastating it nearly ended their civilization. Estimates suggest over 2 billion dead." A murmur moved through the council chamber. "After that war," Vass continued, "human leadership made a decision. Never again would they be caught unprepared. They built, quietly, constantly, for a century, hidden shipyards, stockpiled resources, trained reserves, numbering in the tens of millions. They simply never had a reason to use any of it, until Warlord Threx gave them one." Kovex's massive hand curled into a fist on the table. Threx had been recalled from the front in disgrace after the Battle of the Verge, his career and reputation in ruins. The Grand Marshal had considered having him executed for the failure. Now he understood the failure had not truly been Threx's alone. It belonged to an entire empire that had underestimated an entire species. "Current fleet strength assessment," Kovex demanded. Vass swallowed. "Conservative estimates place active human military strength at 6,000 warships, with production capacity to add 300 more per month. They have begun forming defensive alliances with 2 smaller species along their border, the Ashvari and the Coreline Compact, both of whom suffered under our previous border actions and are eager for protection. They are building a coalition," Kovex said. "Yes, Marshal, and there is something else." Vass hesitated. "Human diplomatic channels have opened contact with the Velkan Empire." The chamber went silent at that. The Velkan were the oldest and most powerful empire in the region, ancient beyond Kothor history, holding technology and military strength that even the Dominion had always been careful to avoid provoking. If the Velkan threw their weight behind a human alliance, the balance of power in the entire sector would shift permanently. Why would the Velkan ally with a species they have never even formally contacted before this war? Kovex demanded. Vass chose his next words very carefully. "Because, Marshal, the Velkan have spent 3,000 years watching younger empires rise and posture and threaten each other, and they have apparently found humanity interesting. Our reports indicate the Velkan Council was particularly struck by one detail of the Battle of the Verge. Which detail? That General Voss ordered her fleet to let the defeated Cathtor forces retreat, rather than annihilate them, despite having the firepower to do so. The Velkan interpreted this as evidence of restraint, paired with overwhelming strength, a combination they apparently respect a great deal. The Kovac sat back in his chair, the weight of the situation settling over him like a physical thing. He had spent his entire career believing that strength alone determined the order of the galaxy. Now an empire he had dismissed as soft was proving that strength held in reserve, used with discipline and purpose, could be more frightening than strength used carelessly. "What is the Council's recommendation?" he asked finally. Vass's voice was quiet. "Sue for peace, Marshal. Before the human coalition grows any larger, before the Velkan formally commit, we have already lost 4 fleets and 3 border systems. Continued war risks losing far more." A younger council member, hot-blooded and proud in the way young Cathor officers often were, slammed a fist on the table. "Surrender to a species we outnumbered 10 to 1 100 years ago? This is unthinkable." "It is not surrender," Kovac said slowly, working through the logic even as he spoke it aloud. "It is recognition. We made an error in judgment about what humanity had become while we were not watching. The wise response to an error is correction, not stubborn repetition of the same mistake at greater cost." He looked around the chamber at the assembled council, ancient and proud, and now, for the first time in living memory, genuinely afraid of a species they had once considered beneath notice. "Open diplomatic channels with the Unified Earth Council," Kovacs ordered. "Request formal cessation of hostilities, and someone find out everything possible about this General Voss, and about whoever built that hidden fleet in the first place. I want to understand exactly what kind of species we provoked, before we make the mistake of provoking it again." Far across the verge, aboard the Resolute, General Voss received the Dominion's request for peace talks with the same calm she had carried through the entire war. She had expected this moment would come, eventually, once the Cathor understood the scale of what they had started. President Okonkwo's voice came through on a secure channel from Earth. "You're asking for terms, Elena. How do you want to proceed?" Voss considered the question carefully before answering. "Full reparations for Erebus 7, and every colony they've harassed at the border over the last 50 years. Formal recognition of Earth's sovereign territory, with no further incursions, and a permanent peacekeeping presence at the verge, jointly staffed, so this never happens again without consequence." "That's reasonable," Okonkwo said, "almost generous, considering what they did." "It's not generosity," Voss said. "It's strategy. We don't need to crush them into the ground to make our point. We need them to understand, permanently, that attacking us has a cost too high to ever consider paying again. A humiliated enemy who still has something left to lose makes a more reliable peace than a desperate one with nothing left to fear." Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. "You sound like you've been planning this exact moment for a long time, Elena." "I have," Voss admitted. "Everyone at Site Hadrian has. For 100 years, we built ships and trained crews and hoped we'd never need any of it. But hope was never the plan. The plan was always to be ready, and to use what we built with exactly enough force to end a threat, and exactly enough restraint to make sure it stayed ended." She looked out at the assembled human fleet, still holding position at the edge of the verge, a wall of steel and discipline that had, in a few short weeks, rewritten the entire galaxy's understanding of what Earth actually was. "Tell the Cathor we'll meet their delegation in 72 hours, Voss said. "And tell our new friends in the Velkan Empire that humanity appreciates the interest. We might have more to discuss with them, once this business with the Dominion is settled." Across known space, the news spread fast. Humanity, the soft and talkative species, the one everyone had agreed posed no real threat, had fought a war against one of the galaxy's oldest and most feared empires, and won so thoroughly that the empire itself was now begging for peace. Every government within 100 light-years of Sol began quietly, urgently, reassessing exactly how they had been treating their human neighbors, and exactly how they intended to treat them going forward. The age of underestimating Earth was over. What came next would be something entirely new. The Peace Summit took place aboard a neutral station at the edge of the verge, a massive ring of metal and glass built decades ago for trade negotiations that had never amounted to much. Today, it hosted something far heavier than any trade deal. General Voss arrived with a small delegation, dressed not in her combat uniform but in the formal dress of the Unified Earth Fleet, dark blue with silver trim. Beside her walked President Okonkwo, who had insisted on attending in person despite the security concerns. Some moments, the president had said, needed a civilian face as much as a military one. The Cathor delegation arrived an hour later, led by Grand Marshal Kovacs Dahl himself. It was a mark of how seriously the Dominion now took this conflict, that their highest military authority had come to negotiate in person, something unheard of in Cathor diplomatic tradition. Kovacs studied Voss across the negotiating table with the careful, measuring look of a soldier sizing up an opponent he had badly misjudged. "General Voss, you do not look like what I expected." "What did you expect?" Voss asked. "Something larger, perhaps. Something that looked more like the fleet you commanded." Voss allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "We learned a long time ago that the size of the threat isn't always visible on the outside, Marshal. I'd have thought your people would understand that lesson by now." Kovacs's jaw tightened, but there was no real anger in it, only the grim acknowledgement of a hard truth, freshly learned. The negotiations that followed lasted 6 days. Voss held firm on every major point, just as she had told President Okonkwo she would. Full reparations for the families of Erebus 7. Formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty along the border. A joint peacekeeping force at the verge, with both Cathor and human officers serving side by side, so that neither side could claim the other had simply walked away unwatched. What surprised the Cathor delegation most was what Earth did not demand. No territorial expansion into Dominion space. No demand for tribute beyond direct reparations. No public humiliation. No parade of captured ships. No insistence on naming the Dominion's failures before the wider galaxy. "You could ask for far more," Kovacs said on the final day, studying the terms laid out before him. "You have the fleet to take it. Why show this restraint?" Voss considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because the goal was never to conquer you, Marshal. The goal was to make sure you never again think attacking us costs nothing. We achieved that. Anything more would just be cruelty. And cruelty has a way of breeding the next war instead of preventing it." Kovacs was quiet for a long time after that. Then, slowly, he signed the treaty. Word of the peace agreement spread across known space within hours, carried by news networks and diplomatic channels and the quiet whispers of traders who moved between systems faster than any official report. Humanity, the species once dismissed as soft, had fought one of the galaxy's most feared empires to a standstill, won decisively, and then shown a kind of restraint and victory that few empires in recorded history had ever managed. It changed everything. Within a month, formal delegations from a dozen species arrived at Earth, requesting trade agreements, defense pacts, and in several cases, simple audiences with the humans who had so thoroughly rewritten the rules of power in the sector. The small Ashvari and Corline compact alliances that had quietly backed Earth during the war found themselves suddenly courted by species who had ignored them for decades, now eager to be seen standing near humanity's new reputation. And the Velkan Empire, ancient and famously difficult to impress, sent their own ambassador to Earth in person, a rare honor reserved for civilizations they considered worth real attention. The ambassador, a tall, silver-skinned being named Illyra Thess, met with President Okonkwo and General Voss in a quiet garden outside the Unified Earth Council building in Geneva, far from cameras and formal ceremony. "We have watched your species for longer than you realize," Illyra said, looking out over the garden with eyes that had seen centuries pass, quietly, from a distance. "We do this with every young species that survives its own early wars. Most either destroy themselves, or they become exactly what destroyed them, expanding outward with the same violence that nearly ended them at home." "And us?" Okonkwo asked. "What did you see in us?" "Something rarer," Illyra said. "A species that nearly ended itself, learned from the experience instead of repeating it, and built strength not to use carelessly, but to hold in reserve until it was truly needed. You fought a war you did not start, won it decisively, and then chose peace over conquest, when conquest was easily within reach. In 3,000 years of watching young civilizations rise, we have seen that combination perhaps twice before." Voss listened to this with the same quiet, careful attention she brought to every briefing, every battle plan, every decision that had shaped the last few months of her life. "What happens now?" she asked. Illyra turned to look at her directly. "Now, General Voss, the galaxy adjusts. Empires who once ignored you will study you. Empires who once might have considered testing your borders, as the Cathor did, will think twice. And perhaps, in time, Humanity will take its place among the older civilizations of this region, not as a curiosity at the edge of known space, but as a power whose word carries weight. She paused, something almost like respect in her ancient eyes. The Velkan Empire would like to formally open relations with Earth. Not simply trade, partnership. We do not extend this offer lightly, or often. Okonkwo and Voss exchanged a glance, the weight of the moment settling between them. "We'd be honored," Okonkwo said. Months later, back at Site Hadrian, General Voss stood once more in the underground command center, where this entire chapter of human history had begun. The facility was no longer a quiet, half-forgotten relic. It hummed with constant activity now, ships moving in and out of dock, fresh recruits training in the wide corridors, the entire base alive in a way it had not been in over a decade. Kai Anders found her there, no longer the nervous young pilot who had shaken in his cockpit before his first battle. The months of war had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with the calendar. He had earned a promotion, and a quiet kind of confidence that came from having survived something most people never would. "General," he said, "permission to ask you something." "Go ahead," Voss said. "Was it worth it? Everything we did, everyone we lost, was it worth what we got out of it?" Voss thought about Captain Mara Solis, who had stayed on a dying bridge so that 43 people could escape. She thought about the pilots who never came home from the Battle of the Verge. She thought about 100 years of patient, quiet preparation, paid for in full in just a few short months of fire. "I don't know if anything is ever worth what it costs," she said finally. "But I know this. For 200 years we hid our strength because we were afraid of what we'd become if we ever used it. We learned something important this year. Strength held with discipline, used with purpose, and tempered with mercy when the fighting is done. That's not the thing we were afraid of becoming." She looked out at the ships moving steadily through the dock, the next generation of Earth's defenders training in the corridors around them, the galaxy slowly adjusting itself around a species it had finally learned to take seriously. "That's just what we always were, underneath all that quiet," she said. "We just needed a reason to remember it." Far above the planet, the human fleet that had once been a secret held in reserve now stood openly in the light, a wall between Earth and any future threat, foolish enough to test it again. And across the galaxy, in council chambers and command centers belonging to a dozen different species, the same understanding had taken root and would not soon fade. They had attacked a convoy. The galaxy had frozen, and Earth, quiet no longer, had finally shown the stars exactly what it had been building, all along, in the patient dark.